You are listening to Seniors Junction podcast. We are working to end seniors isolation, one conversation at a time. Your hosts today, Dr. Namrata Bagaria, and myself, Paul Merkley. We are the co-founders of Seniors Junction. Our guest today is Anthony Kupferschmidt, Director of the West End Seniors Network in Vancouver. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, and your experience in the industry?
Absolutely. So I'm the executive director of the West End Seniors Network in Vancouver. We're a registered charity, a not-for-profit organization. We're the second largest independent senior center in Vancouver. We are a multi-site senior center, so we provide social, educational, recreational, and supportive programs and services across 3 sites. We serve the downtown area of Vancouver. That's the really quick overview about what we do. So my background is also in mental health and aging, so the issue of isolation and loneliness in older adults is very important to me.
Wonderful. I think I'm going to poke your background a little bit more because I had the time to look you up on LinkedIn. And so you studied in the east part of Canada and eastern part of Canada, and now you work in the western part. And so if just for the background's sake, how is isolation? How does it look different between these two places? Does it look the same? And you had mentioned a certain statistic about your population and living alone. So could you just tell more about those things?
Absolutely, and that's part of why this issue is so important to me, and certainly in my day-to-day work right now. So yes, I studied at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and at McMaster University in their gerontology program before I moved out west to do my master's in gerontology at Simon Fraser University under the supervision of a clinical psychologist. And I've worked a lot in the area of dementia and family caregiving. But when I moved to Vancouver, I picked the West End because it was very close to the campus. And it was the best uninformed decision I ever made because then when this opportunity came about, I got the chance to work in the neighborhood where I live. So that was fantastic. Part of the what makes the West End neighborhood in Vancouver particularly unique is there's a high proportion of renters, a lot of high rises, and a very large LGBTQ2 SAI population. But for older adults in particular, well, the neighborhood is considered very highly walkable, has a walkability score of 95. So what that often means is there's a lot more older adults out and about on the street. Many older adults have given up their vehicles because they can walk and access almost everything that they need. So these are all pluses. But the neighborhood actually doesn't have a larger proportion of older adults than any other neighborhood in Vancouver. What makes it particularly unique is that 2/3, over 60% of the older adults in the West End neighborhood live alone. And that number is really quite high compared to the other neighborhoods in Vancouver where less than 30% of older adults live alone. So it has a lot to do with the nature of the high rises. The neighborhood is actually considered also the second poorest in the neighborhood, in the city after the downtown east side. There's a lot of seniors who have either retired to the neighborhood because of the walkability and proximity to a hospital, or they have aged in place. Perhaps they're now widowed, etc., living in smaller units. So there's some particular challenges related to isolation and loneliness that we think our community faces.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. And in your opinion, apart from this little background, like my question is, what do you see are the pain points with relation to isolation? Like what is the issue in that? Like what is the pain point in your neighborhood, in your community?
Right, absolutely. So I think that pain point really is that with such a high proportion of older adults that live alone and in small units, it's often hard to have those connections. I always find it fascinating that in these tall buildings, you literally have people that are living above, below, and beside you, but you may or may not have made those connections with people that can be those social connections. So that's one of the areas. A lot of the time, these buildings are naturally occurring retirement communities, or NORCs. So there's a high proportion of older adults that live in the buildings, even though they weren't necessarily designed with that in mind. So there may be accessibility challenges in some of these buildings that can contribute to it. Again, the high proportion of renters and low-income seniors in the neighborhood can often contribute to a digital divide and technology barriers. And that's something that is, of course, we're finding is even more important than ever in keeping people connected during this pandemic. So there's a few of those factors that come into play.
What is your vision of addressing or trying to solve these issues?
Yeah. So there are a lot of different ways to approach this issue, and I don't know that anyone has fully cracked that nut, to be perfectly honest with you. I had the pleasure of, well, but that means there's lots of different ways that we're coming at these challenges. I had the pleasure of sitting on the City of Vancouver Seniors Advisory Committee for a few years. And in my time there, I helped contribute to a large report called the SILAS report, which stands for Social Isolation and Loneliness Among Seniors. That report had 23 recommendations in it, and the city is slowly working their way through some of those recommendations. And this report was completed in 2018, and it's amazing looking back at the report how many of the recommendations, you know, hindsight is 2020. How wonderful it would have been to have some of these things in place before the pandemic, but that's all we can do is work forward. One of the ways that we are trying to address this issue, of course, we scaled up services at the beginning of the pandemic, check-in phone calls to all of our members and clients that are ongoing. But in what I wanted to talk to you about today, one of the things that we're trying to do is our Close to Home program. And this is a program that works to build connections and address isolation and loneliness in multi-unit residential buildings by offering on-site social, recreational, and educational programs. So the intention is for building residents to be supported by other resident volunteers as well as staff of the West End Seniors Network to organize activities and events right in the lobbies or amenity rooms or common rooms buildings, so that to encourage people to step out and talk and eat and learn and share with their neighbors, and trying to offer these things right where people live. We're trying to overcome transportation and mobility challenges that can often be an issue. So residents are more likely to engage when they don't have to leave their building, for example. So that's one of the approaches that we're trying to take. And we also know how important it is for neighbors to be connected with your neighbors, because they can be a very important source of support. So if you can build a relationship with your neighbors, those neighbors, of course, can be those social contacts, but they may also provide more tangible supports as well, perhaps like helping an older adult take out garbage or change light bulbs. Those little things that can add up and can impact a person's ability to live at home in the community as independently as possible for as long as possible.
That's beautiful. In fact, when we were conceiving the idea of Seniors Junction, I had to do a lot of market research. And one of the things is you talk to a lot of people, and given that it's pandemic, you can't meet a lot of people in person. You can't get out of the building and talk, right? So somehow whomever I could connect to, and there was one lady who lives in a complex, like a multi-story complex, and she mentioned that, so there's a trend that older adults above 55, like between 55 to 75, they will help typically the ones who are 80, 85, like with cooking, they would like leave like a dish or a muffin box, and you knock on the door, leave a message. And then when the bubbles, when this, at least in Ottawa, I don't know what's in Vancouver, but in Ontario, we have the social bubbles where you have like few people in your bubble that you can meet when the guidelines were like a little looser, restrictions were open. And they were like, they would meet in the terrace of the building or the compound, like, because that's a safer bubble to have. And then of course, they do book clubs and bridge and things like that. So totally, like I was seeing what you do on the website. So yeah, language, like all those things, like yes, and yes, like it hits all the right boxes.
Well, the pandemic is the pandemic has presented challenges for this program, of course, as well, right? Because of those bubbles that can really limit how some people come together. So the original vision was to bring neighbors together, but not everyone wants all of their neighbors in their bubble because they may have other people in their bubble, right? So, Nam, you're absolutely right that having those connections right where you live can be part of that bubble. And that's actually one thing that we found with Close to Home is we pivoted during the pandemic where people didn't feel comfortable coming together in person. Instead, that became more about how else can you support and connect with your neighbors. It might be one-to-one. It might be, in the hallway. It might be figuring out if who needs someone to pick up their groceries or run other errands for them if they don't feel comfortable going into the grocery store. And of course, we as an organization, we're helping to deliver some of those types of programs and services to older adults in the community already. We were actually named by the Provincial Ministry of Health as one of 24 agencies around the province that was asked to scale up to support older adults to remain living safe at home. They called them COVID-19 response hub agencies. So we were doing all those things, but we really impressed on residents in the neighborhood the capacity. It was really tough to meet the challenge, to meet the need. So we really encourage people to support their neighbors. Check in on your neighbors, the people in your building, see what supports are needed. And so because we had that already happening in close to home buildings, that helped to respond to the challenges that were happening. And of course, some buildings also have some outdoor green space as well, which made it easier for people to come together and feel more safe in that way, in a physically distanced way.
Yes, no, I mean, I totally agree. What do you think, Paul? A lot of it resonates with you, right?
It does. It does. I'm thinking too, as you're speaking, it's not that many years ago that we had the terrible story of the heat wave in Paris, and so many older people died in their units, and no one checked on them. No one even knew.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, it resonates.
Yeah,
I think it's excellent. So these are the challenges. What are the opportunities?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we're trying to scale up our close to home program and reach more buildings, we know that they're there, and we know there's a high proportion of seniors in them. And Paul, certainly there's other challenges as well, right? Getting your foot in the door in some of these buildings usually requires a landlord, property manager, some other sort of buy-in, even if the residents are quite excited about it. If you're going to start to do programming in a lobby, you want to make sure you're not going to upset others living in the building, right, or those running the building. So there's certainly a lot of challenges to this kind of model, but when there's buy-in, we've certainly seen the payoff. But we are trying to scale this up because there are these high proportion of buildings where we think we can do this, and this is also well, maybe I'll add this point as well. This is not just about older adults. So we as a senior serving organization are prioritizing buildings that are naturally occurring retirement communities, but we're not having that programming or those opportunities be exclusive to older adults. So the promotion in the building is for everyone. People of all ages are welcome. Sometimes the timing of when things happen may be a bit of a challenge. Because if you're getting people together over a lunch on a Tuesday, there may be other people who are not who are working, whatever, not able to come. But of course, again, during the pandemic, that has changed some of these dynamics, right? So we're trying to do more to offer this kind of programming to overcome those transportation and mobility barriers. We also know, I mean, I will be perfectly honest, this isn't rocket science, right? And this is not, that's the best thing about trying to find solutions to isolation and loneliness. Sometimes, I mean, that human desire to connect is innate, right? So hopefully finding the simplest way to do that will resonate. And we're also, this is not copyrighted. This is not an original idea. This is not exclusive. There's lots of other groups in other communities trying to do similar things. So I think there is lots of opportunity. given that in many urban centers, there are lots of high rises. So and people are aging in place and living in the community longer. So how can we capitalize on that and support people to live at home?
Exactly. I mean, I'm smiling away because every word that's come out of your mouth literally has been our experience. Like every word, right? How you get in the buildings. I mean, do you email the landlord if they are okay with the rest? We've been talking about this, you know. Of course, we had some leads in some ways, and we need to know what happens with those leads, right? So we don't know. We just got excited. Okay, somebody just replied, so we're happy with like baby steps, right? And we just jumped and did a little dance because we were like, let's have low expectations. But like for me personally, because I didn't grow up in Canada, right? And there's this whole conversation about privacy and personal space. And yes, I also need it and I value it too. But I grew up in India, right? And it's a very connected by default community, right? I live in a high rise here. You know, if you go downstairs for a walk in the morning at the same time, you probably know half the building people, right? And they'll all tell you, and if you don't go, they'll actually call you from the what do you call it, intercom, and they'll check in if there something happened. So this is this whole concept of connectedness or relation or belonging or relatedness. And then Paul and I are working on a research chapter because we are researchers in our day jobs. It's called connected autonomy, right? And that's a big thing. And there's a whole book. So by the way, there's a textbook coming out, and we are one of the chapters, chapter 8 to be precise. It changes by the time it's published. I don't know. and as you're talking, isolation is it's not just oh, it's not a demographic issue. It's a cultural, it's a personal choice. There's so many things. It's from personality factors to the environment setup, right? For example, now in Mumbai, I'm from Mumbai, there is no space, right? So you are lonely in a crowd here. You still are lonely, but in a crowd probably. Versus in Canada or in Ottawa, there's goddamn so much space, right? It's so much space. Like when I came in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe, like, I can't see people like till far away, because a lot of times I would live by myself in different geographies of India to work. And it didn't make a difference because I would just get down, there's somebody who talks to you, you come back. I was having all my communications. But when I moved to Canada, those little hellos or good mornings, or do you want this? And they stopped, and then I became the social cheerleader suddenly from someone who was very, like, if you met me when I was in India, you wouldn't think I'm that social, right? So I changed a lot too. And there's also then the socioeconomic factor, there's a race factor, there's so many social determinants of this issue, personality determinants, and then there's the whole network effect, like we can go on. And then the tech piece, right? So one part is which is the right tech or the right product market fit, but the digital literacy is a barrier, trust in the technology is a barrier. So it's multifaceted problem. And it's like, some people have health issues because of isolation, some people have psychological issues, sometimes it's some physical stuff. So it's a Pandora's box, and the more podcasts we do, the more we are like, oh my God, this is so big. We need to narrow down what we really want to do, whom we can help. Because if you just say isolation, it's almost like you're saying, okay, yeah, we work in reproductive health. Well, it's the same thing. It's a big field, like, there's so much happening in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. No, you're absolutely right. Like I said, there's different ways. I could probably talk to you about a few different things that we're trying to do and explore to address the issue. But it's a massive issue, one of the biggest of our time, certainly right now, and we have to bite that off a little bit at a time and try these different approaches. But the thing is, there's also strength in numbers. And so that's one of the things that I love about our Close to Home program, is that we have gotten actually connected with something called the Hey Neighbor Collective here in BC. And this collective, what it does, it brings together housing providers and associations, not-for-profit organizations, researchers, local and regional governments, and health authorities, all to experiment with and learn ways of building community, social connectedness, and resilience, in this case, in multi-unit housing communities in BC. So we're trying to, it's an intentional group trying these different models in different types of housing settings. and trying to prototype and pilot community building programs and activities. But there's also action research and learning, knowledge mobilization, as well as engagement with the housing industry and work on policy. Because you can do all of these things in a single building, for example. That's not necessarily, you might change the world of people in that building, but you're not going to change the world that way. So trying to take those learnings and apply those elsewhere so that this can become part of that sea change that we need to address this larger issue everywhere.
No, that's perfect. I mean, this is exactly what we're trying to do with the podcast, to like make a central body of knowledge. Because like if you look at isolation per se, that's such a big thing. And then you come down to, let's say, senior isolation. And then one of our guests taught us there's a difference between physical and social isolation. And another podcast we just recorded, I mean, the week before, was about within isolation, boredom versus loneliness versus, what was the third thing called? Boredom, loneliness, and one more factor, right?
But yeah, the interaction.
Yeah.
Right. So like as we learn from different guests, because we are also educating ourselves, this whole podcast is like educational piece. What suddenly come out of it is as if we're making a platform for all the knowledge. Whoever's tried whatever, we try to put all the transcripts out there, videos, because there's some auditory learners, there's some visual learners, there's some people who like to read, but I think what's eye-opening is that it's such a big public health issue, it's such a big social issue, it's such a big healthcare issue, it's such a big financial, like you can put the word, and it's such a generational, even to the point of, as a society, as human beings, and like Paul is a historian by profession, music historian. He was talking about Renaissance period and how people were quarantined in the 15th century when the plague happened, and there was isolation then. And that's where we started this company with that. So he was like, oh, they did music and they did this. And I'm like, wait a minute, did you say that they were quarantined? He's like, that's the word quarantine came from Renaissance. I'm like, what are you talking about? And that's how our company took birth, because of him teaching me music history just casually. And so Paul, how did in the 15th century, how did they solve isolation piece? What do you think was happening?
As far as I can tell, by doing all of these activities, that they were very important. If they had music, if they had poetry, whatever they had that they could sharing, best they could do. A lot of letter writing going back and forth, because of course they had no telephonic means, so they had a lot of messengers, letter writing, great deal.
Yeah. And so it's a private joke that we are in Renaissance 2.0 kind of a thing, right?
There's nothing new under the sun, right? It's a different time, and it is interesting. We've also brought in a pen pal program, right? And so many other organizations like ours have as well. So letter writing is making a little bit of a comeback, and people might be corresponding, maybe less so with people in their building because they can talk to them in a different way, but in other buildings, and of course encouraging those phone calls and emails where that's possible too. But there's something about good old-fashioned letter writing that of course does still appeal to many older adults as well. So making those connections in any format it can take. So
no, even to the younger ones. In fact, I had a friend.
Yes.
He WhatsApped me a letter I wrote to him 11 years ago. And I was like, what? I didn't even remember I wrote that. I was like, this is my handwriting, right? And the joy. And then I started thinking, when was the last time I wrote something with my pen, right? So, because also at a biological level, your neurons only get trained with your fine motor neuron skills, and all the brain-mind connection happens not with your typing, it happens with your writing. So yes, a bit tangential, but it's like that we can just agree. And for the listeners, it's the first time we actually met Anthony. We've not spoken to him at all. And this is the amount of agreement we have without even speaking ahead in time for the podcast. So, Anthony, what's your advice to a new startup like ours, which is working in this space? Like, what's your advice for us?
Oh my goodness. That's a really good question. I mean, my first reaction is just to keep doing what you're doing, to be honest with you. You're starting to build that critical mass, having some of these conversations happen across jurisdictions so that we can all share and learn from one another, I think is really vital. So beyond that, no, I don't have any other great advice for you except keep up the good work. And this, we're not going to solve this anytime soon. Just despite how massive this issue is, it is going to linger. So we just, like I said, we need to take it one step at a time with this. And so it may, I certainly know I sometimes can feel a little bit discouraged. I'm the kind of person who likes to see things done yesterday, solve it onto the next challenge. But some of these things, that's just not possible, right? So it's a little bit about staying the course and continuing to chip away at it. And the more people that we slowly reach, that's where we're going to have the impact. So while also helping to inform decision makers as well, so they can make more of those systemic changes that are needed.
And luckily, I live in Ottawa, so I don't think they're far away from me. But it's just hard to get a handle on them.
Yes, absolutely. And I come from a research background, so I was in research for many years, and so sometimes is a little bit discouraging when you think about how long it takes for research papers, et cetera, to translate into real life changes. But you need all of that. You need all of those pieces together to actually make that impact. So
I agree, and I think what you said is encouraging, because I think a few days ago, Paul, I just messaged him saying, you know what, I'm going to do this for 10 years. I don't care what speed it happens. And I just said, I'm not changing what I'm doing, because I was so tired of going around loops, because every time you solve one and there's another problem, right? So it's like, because we are new too, right? So we haven't really like zeroed down on one little problem, because you need to have impact as a business, or even as a nonprofit for that matter. The impact has to come. People should know what you can offer them. So while we are in our early teething, not even teething, birth, we're just born. I'm trying to send my newborn baby to college. That's my problem too. So you have that yesterday, and I'm sending our newborn to college. So we're all in the same boat of being crazy. So, so that's wonderful. And Anthony, if people have to find you, could you tell the listeners your coordinates?
absolutely. So if people are interested in connecting with me or our organization, finding out about more we're doing, you can look us up online. Our organization is called the West End Seniors Network, and our website is wesn.ca. So, and I'm always happy to chat with anyone who's interested in talking more about this or any other issues related to aging. So I've made a career out of this. I've been working with older adults since I was a teenager, and so it's my passion. And I always like to support students as well, people just learning in the field, because certainly knows with the aging population, we've got a lot of catching up to do to address some of the challenges that our society is going to face. So always happy to work and connect with others who see the amount of, there's a lot of work ahead of us, but that excites me. And so working with like-minded people is really is how we're going to solve some of these issues, right? So happy to connect with anyone who'd like to be in touch.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.